is my pleasure to welcome everyone to our to this session on regulatory considerations for AI in MedTech today. I'm really excited about this session. I think it's going to be a lot of really good information from these two. To kick us off, I would like to start with a short introduction on Amplify MedTech. For those of you who don't know me, I am Fehmida Kapadia. I am the founder of Amplify MedTech. Amplify MedTech was founded in November of 2024 with the goal to establish a unified MedTech ecosystem by promoting collaboration, networking, and sharing of resources among startups, investors, service providers, and all the ecosystem partners involved with supporting MedTech companies. We aspire to cultivate a vibrant, sustainable, and locally engaged MedTech community to stimulate economic growth in the area. We are engaged in a few different things. You are in one of the educational programs that we do. We also host networking events. We are planning an event on July 9th. So please put that on your calendar. You guys will be receiving more information about it soon. We are developing partnerships with various organizations that will help support the MedTech ecosystem as we are building and growing. And we are working on resource mapping and online solutions that you will be hearing about soon in the next few months. We serve everyone in the MedTech ecosystem, from startups to corporations to service providers, ESOs, economic development agencies, entrepreneurs, investors, and academic institutions. And the reason for adopting this model is because we all know that it takes a village to build a company, and startups need all these resources. And in turn, providers, ESOs, academic organizations, they all need to partner with startups for the various activities. And so by supporting the entire ecosystem, we are facilitating a seamless collaboration. We create impact, as we talked about, by enhancing collaboration, unifying the ecosystem, facilitating access to resources. And as we are growing, we are 7 months old now. And as we are growing, we are developing more resources that you'll have access to. Community engagement, and we are hoping that all of this will support the economic growth of the region and promote sustainability. I apologize for that. We do have an event coming up on June 19th, and that event, that online webinar is going to be on clinical trials. So you will get more information about that shortly, and so please look out for that. I am open to connecting and collaborating with ecosystem partners. So if you have ideas for collaboration, or if there are things that you would like to work on together, please feel free to reach out to me. So with that, I am extremely excited to welcome Jennifer Palinchik and Vivek Ganesh to today's webinar. To get us started, I would like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourselves. Can we get started with Jennifer, please?
Sure. Thank you, Fehmida, for this opportunity to talk about regulatory affairs and how that's impacting the AI-driven medical devices that are forthcoming, I feel like, on a daily basis. My name is Jennifer Palinchik. I'm a biomedical engineer. I also have my MBA in executive entrepreneurship. I have been doing medical device consulting for over 22 years. My initial start was in spine design engineering and bringing implants to the market. And then over the last 2 decades, I've been involved with over 130 medical device clearances, And these devices span across orthopedics, spine, neurology, and other surgical specialties. So thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Welcome, Jennifer. Thank you. Vivek?
Absolutely. Thanks, Fehmida and Jennifer, and looking forward to the panel today. Hopefully, everybody on the call gets some use out of it. My name is Vivek Ganesh. My background is primarily biomedical engineering and electrical engineering. Did my undergrad and then worked at Apple for a year on the Apple Watch, the Series 1. So that was exciting to see that product. And then got my PhD in electrical engineering as well. I co-founded Nurava about 6 years ago, looking to commercialize research coming out of the lab that I was involved in. We're primarily developing wearable devices in the epilepsy space for seizure and cardiorespiratory monitoring at Nurava. And my experience is almost 7 years of medical device development, spanning implantable devices and wearable devices. I lead most of the strategic business development and regulatory affairs at Nurava as well. And so, yeah, excited to be on the call and share what I've learned in my journey so far.
Thank you. Welcome, Vivek. Get us started. Jennifer, I would like to start with you. And give us a high-level overview of the regulatory process. What are the different regulatory approvals that a MedTech should be thinking about? And how do they know which is the right one for them?
Sure. Thank you for that question. So the overall strategy for medical devices is really understanding the risk of the device and the various classifications that FDA provides in terms of how they intend to regulate the product, the amount of scrutiny and documentation that is going to be required, and then also the pre-market notification aspect. So there are 3 classes of devices for FDA: Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3. Class 1 devices are no risk or very minimal risk to the patient. They do not require pre-market notification, meaning reaching out to FDA ahead of going to market. They do require quality system management. Actually, all 3 classes require a quality management system for operations moving forward in post-market, and then some of the pre-market aspects as well. Class 2 devices are what is mostly common, 510(k) submission for those of you who have heard of that process. Those are medium risk devices, but there is yeah. Can you hear me?
We lost you for a second, but you're back now.
Okay, sorry. Okay, well, I was just going into Class 2 devices. So Class 2 devices require a 510(k) submission, which is called a pre-market notification. And those are for, medium risk devices. One misconception is a lot of people think that implants, for instance, do not fall in this class, but they actually do. A lot of the implants that are not life-supporting or life-sustaining, for instance, the spine products that I worked on, earlier in my career, and then a lot of the very invasive products that I've been working on in my tenure, those fall in that Class 2 510(k) submission process. And then the Class 3 is where your pre-market approval comes into play. So these devices, they have no comparable predicate to compare to in the market. They are high risk, high or life-sustaining devices, life-supporting devices, and they go through a very rigorous process of review with the FDA, clinical trials, a lot of clinical evaluation and evidence to prove their safety and efficacy. And then a final class, it's not technically a class, but a process for approval is called de novo. So de novo is for products that do not quite hit the life-sustaining or life-supporting risk, but they do not have a comparable predicate device to compare to via the 510(k) process. So the FDA came up with a de novo application where you can provide a risk-benefit analysis as well as all of your verification and validation testing and device information to prove efficacy for a product that you can't compare to. So that's the de novo process. So those are the main regulation submissions that FDA looks for in terms of getting a product to market.
Excellent. And Vivek, Neurava is 510K class 2, is that correct?
Yep, that's right. Exactly. So, yeah, we're a class 2 device, you know, and like Jennifer pointed out, we did have predicate devices that we could go to the FDA with, and so we fell under the 510K. You know, our intention was to pursue that approach, and so we also designed our regulatory strategy to be in line with that, for reasons related to, you know, making sure the company was funded and, you know, the timelines to getting a product approved and all the other considerations that normally founders and other startup operators should take into account in terms of, you know, the burden of proof and evidence necessary to get to a product cleared.
Okay. And so can you talk a little bit about what kind of studies did you have to do in order to get through meet the class 2 requirements?
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. So, you know, I'll start off with, you know, just a general statement there that, you know, depending on the class that you know, most of the, looks like around 33% of folks here, you know, have a startup at early stage, et cetera. But, you know, you want to think about the class that, or the risk profile of your device, which ultimately then determines the class that you fall under per FDA. And based off of that, you know, the requirements for studies are different for each of those classes. For us specifically at Neurava, you know, we started about 6 years ago when I began the company. You know, we wanted to pursue the class 2 510K approach, and part of that is identifying the predicate devices that we need to demonstrate substantial equivalence to. And that is a, you know, part of the process of putting together a 510K by definition. If you are in a de novo or PMA, you don't have that because there isn't a predicate device. So one thing that helped us early on was looking for those predicate devices, which are essentially devices that were previously cleared by the FDA, that likely at one point or another went through a de novo themselves to get onto the market, right? And so as part of that, they essentially, you look at the clinical performance testing that those companies and that technology underwent. And as part of 510K, the requirement there is to be able to perform a similar amount or level of performance testing to establish that your technology is reasonably similar to the predicate and does not raise new questions of safety and efficacy. And so to that end, we had a chance to look at our predicate devices, look at the studies that they did. And so for us, we had to do 2 studies in total, which we term as usability studies, where the primary outcome was to ensure the device and the technologies were usable, raise no adverse events, and then as part of that, also collect data relative to gold standard. You know, our population, our beachhead is epilepsy patients and folks living with epilepsy. And so we did this inside the clinic at 6 leading centers and collected all the gold standard data that is normally collected as part of a routine visit, in addition to then, of course, collecting data with our device and then using that data to develop our algorithms and then establish our performance metrics based off of that. So it wasn't a clinical trial. It was just a usability study, and we did 2 of them throughout the course of our, you know, previous 6 years here. And we're just about to submit our 510K, hopefully in the next week to the FDA. Fehmida, sorry, you're muted.
Very exciting time for you. So
Yep.
how many patients did you study?
We did in total 90 patients,
Okay.
adults and children 6+. You know, I wish there was always like an easy number to pick. That was something we had to design and carefully develop based off of, you know, the statistical profile of the data we're collecting and, you know, what it would take for us to provide metrics with enough confidence. And so, yeah, at least for us, it was 90 patients.
So Jennifer, if Vivek had to go through the de novo process, how many patients would he have to typically do?
So there isn't an actual, you know, specified number that FDA provides. What FDA is looking for is for the sponsor, for the company to go to them with their planned.
Looks like we lost her again.
Execution, you know, is Am I
Jennifer, we
losing again?
lost you again for a second, so you might
Oh my
have to repeat
goodness.
yourself.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. My connection says it's excellent. So,
No worries.
um, anyways, again, going back to FDA does not provide a specific number that you have to follow from a study perspective. What they expect you to do is to provide them with your study protocol, your sample size, any statistical analysis for coming up with that sample size, etc.
We're having some internet
Data
issues with
set, the
Jennifer.
quality of the data where, oh my goodness.
I think she'll try to rejoin here shortly.
We lost her completely, so she might log back on. But in the meantime, Vivek, let's talk about, so when did you first start talking to the FDA? What was your first interaction with the FDA and what did that look like?
Yeah, we started our journey with the FDA early. We wanted to, understand the regulatory pathway that we would be, likely having to take for the technology that we wanted to bring to market. I founded the company in the summer of 2019, and we had our first interaction with the FDA by early 2021. Part of that is, you have the ability to do a pre-submission with the FDA as part of the Q sub. And I would highly encourage most founders of medtech companies to evaluate that and do that really. It's a really nice way to present an overview of your technology that you're hoping to bring to market to the FDA, and get their buy-in and get their perspective on the evidence that they're looking to, evaluate in order to get your technology cleared, for you to understand and verify your predicate devices if you're in the 510(k) path, or if you're going de novo or PMA, to essentially ask whether the FDA, believes that that's the appropriate path for you and that's the right home for your technology. You do get a limited number of questions that you can ask. So about anywhere from like 3 to 5 questions is typical as part of the process. It's a submission on your end that you put to the FDA. There's almost a 60, 70-day period at which point you'll get some questions back from the FDA. And then you can shortly schedule a 1-hour meeting with the FDA agency and the team that you submitted to answer their questions, and for you to also ask a few follow-ups. And then this is then documented in minutes, and then that is essentially your first regulatory interaction with the agency.
What level of data did you have to have in place before you decided that you were ready for a pre-sub meeting?
Yeah, you definitely don't want to wait too late to go for a pre-sub. Neither do you want to go too early, in my opinion, as a medtech device, speaking specifically, from our perspective, because it's helpful to have some amount of information on the verification and validation of your technology. So the sorts of tests you need to do, either benchtop test, clinical test, your clinical study, your protocol, the requirements, etc. There isn't a simple answer there. But I would say that, earlier is better. You don't have to have data to go to the FDA and do a pre-sub. Sometimes it's as simple as just, again, wanting to introduce a technology and get their initial perspectives. But it is helpful to have, again, enough data or enough information because, in order for the FDA to provide adequate guidance, they need information from you about what your technology does and how is it going to be used in your intended population. And so it definitely does help to have, a little bit of information. In our perspective, we had completed all of our preclinical testing. We had a early prototype, technology available. And so as part of preclinical, we did have data from there. And again, because we did have a sense of going down the 510(k), we also knew the kind of information that the FDA would likely need. But that's not always the case for companies. So, I think it's perfectly adequate to go to your pre-sub with a initial prototype and some benchtop data to show the kinds of information that you hope to collect with your technology.
Okay, thank you.
Am I back,
Yes.
Fehmida? Did it come?
You are back, Jennifer. So I
Hopefully.
wanted to ask you, now with more and more medical devices having an AI component, or even if not an AI component, a software component to it, How is FDA changing its guidelines related to it, and what do companies have to be aware of?
So FDA does have quite a bit of AI and machine learning white papers and information on their website. So if you go to fda.gov and you type in AI guidance, you'll get a host of links that they're providing some information related to development considerations and other items that they're looking for in terms of what they want to see in development. They did just come out with a very important guidance in January of this year related to what they want to see in pre-market submissions. So I highly advise going through that. It's a complementary guidance to the software medical device guidance that is, provides all of the DHF and the content for software specific. And so this is an adjunct to that where they give you very specific information of each section and also where the information should be provided in the 510K, the E-Star program for submitting the 510K and that content specifically.
All right, thank you. And Vivek, you do have an AI component to your device, right? So can you maybe walk us through the strategy that you use for a regulatory approval?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, we do, have an AI component to our algorithms. Initially we're looking at detection alerting, but prediction and forecasting, that's the future for our technology. And so, as part of the current environment and regulatory, from the agency's perspective on AI, right? We cannot get adaptive algorithms on the market just yet. It is a continuously evolving space. The guidance documents on AI change quite frequently. On right now, probably every 3 to 4 months, there's new guidance on, the appropriate steps to get AI in your technology cleared. And so for us, we still have to deploy static algorithms, but what is currently allowable per the FDA is what's known as a predetermined change control plan, a PCCP, which is almost like an addendum to a 510K, for example. But essentially what that allows you is to develop with the agency a plan to use new data that's collected from your technology post initial clearance. So it's out on the market and it's being used by your intended users. You're collecting real world data with your technology, but how do you now use that to improve your models? And so this is essentially a method for the FDA to ensure that you are using best practices to use that new data. So it provides as a technology the ability to use new data, which is always necessary to improve your models, but at the same time almost creates like a semi-controlled environment to verify and validate that model internally at your company before then you have the ability, once you've essentially followed the steps that the FDA and you have worked together to determine, that then allows you to deploy those updated models to your users without having to go through an entire 510K or new submission with the FDA. I think the key piece here is you have to be able to demonstrate that your use of new data and a new model does not create new questions about safety and efficacy. And so long as that is satisfied and the FDA is happy with your process and your verification validation, then you have the ability to do that. So that's part of our strategy here, is getting our devices initially cleared, but then also being able to then deploy new models out to our users to ensure that they're getting the best in class performance that we have as soon as it's available and in line with the approach that we then agree with the FDA.
Thank you. So right now what's allowed by the FDA is static models with data being added, and then as you deploy additional data, you have to make sure that you're in compliance. Jennifer, in your experience, or based on what you're seeing happening, do you think we'll get to a point from an FDA perspective where we can use generative AI and automatic updating of the model without having to go through this process? Or will it always be a static model that we have to use?
I think eventually, yes, it would be able to get to adaptive. However, I think it will be quite some time. I mean, AI just in general is it's evolving constantly. It's based on the data that's inputted. And I think FDA's biggest concern is to make sure that the data is quality and that it's accurate and that it's, it's correct and it's representative of, what it's trying to provide. And so I think trying to put regulation and, enforcement around something that essentially is constantly evolving will take FDA a substantial amount of time to get to. So again, when you look at the regulations, the regulation descriptive is very specific where it says this is not for adaptive. FDA does not those devices are not, essentially ready for the US market for us.
Okay. Are they being used in other markets? Like, what do you have a sense of European guidance, or what's the accessibility there?
I see Vivek is shaking his head. Specifically, I am not aware of the market in the AI space outside of the US. But it looks like from Vivek's experience and what he's probably gone through with his organization that it is probably being deployed from an adaptive perspective, OUS. And
Yeah, no, I was going to say that I think there are other industries that do have the ability. Outside the US, I think it's also still equally limited from an adaptive standpoint. But I think Jennifer's point is what I would stress more. So it depends on the quality of the data that is currently available within that industry, and hence why certain industries have, I would say, more advanced capabilities because there's enough ground truth, high quality data sets that have been curated with experts and subject matter experts, and that the FDA has also had eyes on. So case in point, when it comes to like X-ray images, for example. So imaging data is pretty high quality. And so there is quite a bit more capabilities on the AI side there that the FDA and the agency is comfortable with. And that we still have to catch up in the medical device neuro space as we continue to capture data. So we're getting there. I do think it will take a little bit longer to get to that point. And I think we will get there eventually.
So let's talk a little bit about quality of data, right? What did you have to keep in mind as you were using data?
Right.
What quality did you have to ensure for your data?
Yeah, there's very strict quality, requirements on data for sure. The guidance documents are an excellent resource to understand what the FDA is looking for and how they expect you to present and perform your data quality checks and all of the processes and procedures that you need to go through in order to separate your training and your testing and where you collected the data from the specific centers and how was that blinded and how did you get subject matter experts to be part of a panel and perform an evaluation of that data set as a third party review, for example, right? So these are some of the things that you do have to have in place before you're even ready to start using the data, for example, to develop your algorithms. So it's not as simple as, you have data and you can just start using it on day one. You do have to put in some pretty stringent processes in place in order to make sure that that data is of sufficient quality that the FDA will accept. Right. And that's the difference here in pursuing like a, medical device, class 1, 2, or 3 product is the requirements change. From our perspective, that was exactly the case. We had to set up, third-party reviews. We had to talk with our clinicians and establish panels to review subsets of the data to assess and make sure that it was representative and accurate. One portion of that is as far as our studies is gold standard data. You have to have a sense of what is the gold standard in your industry, and you make sure that you are collecting that information alongside your own data with your technology and be able to compare and contrast. And so that's where, and then there also, in addition to that, I would say is depending on the type of device that you have are the existing standards, right? The ISO standard, the ANSI/AMI standards that you want to make sure you're compliant with, that you have to be compliant with anyway as part of getting a device cleared. But a lot of times those standards call for their own tests and their own data collection that you also need to do as well. So it is multifaceted from that perspective. And then at the end of the day, you present your documentation as part of, a regulated device. You need to have a design history file. You need to have a quality management system. You have to be able to have operating procedures that you follow. How do you, develop to a certain point, you have a design freeze, you reassess, you verify, you validate. Now you want to make an update to your algorithm that has to have a procedure as well. How do you make sure that your training and testing data sets never overlap? And so those are the kinds of things that you have to take into consideration. Your regulatory team should be a really helpful tool here to make sure that as an initial first-time founder, you understand how to properly navigate that process.
I think to
So,
expand, if you don't mind, on the data portion, diversity in demographics is also very important. So you do need to make sure that you have a diverse population where the data comes from. So as Vivek mentioned, multiple centers, but also you have to consider, ethnicity, race, gender, anything that could be, an indication for your device type specifically. So just keep that in, for any startup company, keep in mind, you really have to have that diverse data pool for your device.
On that
right.
note, I think the point there is how do you have to demonstrate to the agency that your data is representative of the general population that you have to serve. And there isn't quick guidance on that either. You have to just be able to demonstrate that sufficiently as a company. But then again, if you are in the 510(k) or anything else, your predicate devices likely have some information that you can pull from or pre-subs.
Thank you. So, Jennifer, Vivek talked a little bit about the regulatory team. In your experience, what consists of a good regulatory team? You worked with hundreds of companies. Who should our startups think about, from a hiring perspective? What do they have to plan for to build a strong regulatory team?
I think the most important is, yes, identifying the right partner. So there's a number of regulatory consulting companies or regulatory affairs specialists that you could hire if you thought an FTE was appropriate. But it's really just understanding the expertise and making sure that aligns with your device type and the final outcome of what you're trying to achieve. So, in this AI space, for instance, you would want to identify somebody who has a thorough understanding of software, of the AI, and as it is even evolving. So ensuring that your regulatory team is constantly staying up to speed and reviewing the guidances, as Vivek said, they're constantly changing. I mean, in general, regardless of AI, FDA's regulations are constantly changing because, as you can imagine, as more and more of these devices go out into commercialization and into the field, FDA is gathering more data on how they are performing in the field, and that's where updates to guidance and regulations occur. If there's adverse events related to a particular technology, they need to look back at their guidance and regulations and confirm that they're making adjustments to mitigate, those types of trends as soon as they, evaluate them, that there's some sort of trend in a negative, or patient harm perspective. So it's, expertise, knowledge, regulatory is not an area that I should say, skimp on, because it really is one of the critical pieces for you to get your product cleared and then ultimately to commercialization.
Yeah, you're very right. I mean, if you skimp on regulatory, you're not getting your product to market, correct? I was at a lunch and learn yesterday, and one of the things that came up during the lunch and learn, which I wanted, your feedback on, is that the submissions have to be online, and there have been some changes to the online portal, and it sounds like you almost need a consultant to work with you to even submit the documents. Jennifer, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, they are trying to make it more streamlined. The portal itself is the same as what it was with the eCopy. But the eStart program is really, it's a living PDF where instead of once upon a time we had binders of documents and then we had a CD with, PDFs named the exact same way and in sequential order. Now we have a PDF, one large PDF where you have to input the information, or you have to attach the PDF documents to this eStart. So it is a little bit of a learning curve, I would say, to identify where Each section is required. And then it is nice, though, that they have a verification check. So when you get the little green check mark that says your E-Star is complete, then you know you've done something right. Because there is like a verification check, and it'll say that it's not correct, and so okay, something is going off in my E-Star, and I need to take a look at the document and the attachments and confirm that they're correct.
So, before we open it up to questions, I have some, I would like to get your thoughts on with companies who do well with their regulatory process. What do they do right? And on the flip side, what are some of the common mistakes that you see companies making?
The companies that succeed are the ones, as Vivek and I mentioned earlier, they go to FDA early. The pre-submission program, the Q-Sub program, is really well established to get in front of FDA and lay out the expectations that they want to see when you go to submit your product. It streamlines the review period. It gives you an understanding of any areas that you need to make adjustments to. And it's critical for the company, because you don't want to go through all of your testing and any sort of studies only to find out that FDA disagrees with your approach or your protocol or your sample size, and then you get placed on hold. So I think those companies that have a real success rate are those that go into FDA early. And I would say with this AI-driven or AI component medical devices, I would not even consider, going without having that pre-submission meeting. The technology has evolved so much and continues to do so. And as I mentioned, as these products continue to be commercialized, FDA's current thinking is definitely changing, and they will be able to provide even more, accurate and current thinking before a guidance can be updated, for instance. So those are the people that, that's where the success is. And then also we can't forget about reimbursement and market adoption. So, making sure that you have a problem, it is a problem, and your solution actually fits that problem. You get your KOLs and your clinicians to provide input early on in the development, because they're the ones that are going to drive, the user side, the revenue, once you go to market. And that's a critical component, making sure that there is a market for your device. It's not, the number of inventors that come to me and they have a really great idea. I always ask, well, how do your colleagues feel about this? Is this really a problem that needs a solution based on, other competitive devices or standard of care solutions? So that part is really important. And those, again, regulatory, reimbursement, and market analysis are like the three main components that are very critical to success. And each one of them is equally important and should be determined from a priority perspective in parallel of each other.
Thank you, Jennifer. And Vivek, you've had a unique methodology of how you have approached the regulatory process, right? And
Right.
it sounds like that has really helped you streamline the process and get to market fast. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And just, that's, I think, an important point for everyone to consider. The advice that I give most of the other companies that I advise as well is, think about your goal and where you're trying to go. The problem, like Jennifer mentioned, you have a problem that you're trying to solve. On day one, it may not be a technology that immediately has a home through the regulatory process or even the reimbursement process for that matter. But that does not mean that you may not be able to break it down into, achievable steps that perhaps do have a path in the agency, right? And that's kind of exactly what happened with us is, we're trying to go after sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. It is something that does not exist. It's a novel indication. It's a novel market. But going down the pathway and providing a technology that could immediately be useful there would have put me in a PMA style or likely a de novo, most likely, and having to do a larger clinical trial and really do outcomes tracking for 1 to 2 years, right? So we're talking about, a small study now becoming likely a 2 or 3 year effort to establish enough data and evidence to prove to the FDA that we are a safe and efficacious technology. So rather than that, what we did was we broke it down again into smaller achievable steps where we get our initial technology cleared with a subset of indications, and then we can then look to expand indications on top of this already cleared technology, and then bring our technology to market slowly and steadily, and essentially rock climb to the next ledge as opposed to jumping up for the mountain peak at the very beginning. And that does a lot of things for a company in the sense of, it creates very achievable, realistic milestones to be able to then fundraise off of and run the company and the business operations. It creates a relationship with the FDA, which is also something I want to make sure that I think gets overlooked a lot, is the agency is just as interested in getting new technology to market as inventors. I think it's a common misconception that, their immediate answer is always going to be no, or that they are gatekeepers of some kind. They're actually just engineers, just like everybody else. And they're just as interested in wanting to get cool technology and impactful technology to market, right? So as part of those initial interactions, all the way from the pre-sub, all the way through to getting an actual submission in, you are building rapport and a relationship with the team and the agency that you're talking to. Likely they'll be keeping up with you for several years in the process. So I think that's also a very important aspect, is once they start having confidence in your technology and your team's ability to properly develop technology, then that also helps a lot in terms of getting technology cleared. So my overarching advice, if you can break it down into steps, do so. There's value in that. And then getting those initial indications and then expanded indications post that is a very adequate way to go. And that does help in particularly this fundraising environment as well.
Thank you. So we've packed in a lot of information in the last 45 minutes. I would like to open it up to questions. If anyone has any pressing questions that they would like to ask our experts, you can either unmute yourself or you can drop your questions in the chat. And while, people are working on that, I also wanted to get your thoughts on, with all the changes that are happening at the FDA currently, what should companies be prepared for as they're trying to navigate this process? Are we looking at longer timelines, slower processes? What should companies prepare for?
Yeah. I think so. The FDA is still open for business. Specifically, the review teams are still intact. So they aren't necessarily expecting that things will take longer. That does not mean it won't take longer. So as a company, it's probably your prerogative to plan for your worst case. Right now, for us, for example, at least on a 510(k), we're probably looking at previously what maybe was a 3-month process to get cleared. So it depends. The other indication of that is also your predicate device and how long it took for them to get clearance as well. So that's one way to start in terms of anticipating how long it would take to bring your device and get it cleared. But I would say we're probably adding in an extra 2-month buffer there, just to make sure that we are realistic and in line with what the environment currently is. So as an agency, I just met with the FDA a week ago. I'm sure Jennifer's had multiple interactions with them this year already, but they are open and available and looking forward to reviewing new technology. But we are conservatively adding in an extra 2-month buffer to when we expect clearance, and so that's kind of where things are.
I think maybe to expand on it, because I have a few submissions that I'm working on that are in FDA review right now. There have been delays, mostly in the Q-Sub program, whether that be when you can have a pre-submission, the SIR. So I had a submission where we submitted a submission issue request where we wanted to talk through mid 510(k) a few clarification questions. So those typically have 75-day timeframes, 21-day timeframes. And those were delayed earlier in the year, in the January, February timeframe. Another submission, the reviewer did specifically say that she was resource constrained. And so it would take her a few extra, like weeks to get back to me via, we were in interactive review for that particular submission. So some things that in the past were almost immediate, I think it just depends on who's on your review team and what their bandwidth is. And then the last, another most recent submission, I honestly feel like the review team ran out of time and we got put on hold at day 89.
Oh, wow.
And so, as you can imagine, for my client, we were really excited. They had already said we can address things via interactive review. So as we got closer to day 90, we felt pretty confident. But at the end of the day, they had to place us on hold mostly because they ran out of time, and they do have to follow that regulation of 90 days. So I would, as Vivek said, I would maybe plan a little bit on the unknown. For the most part, everything seems to be, pretty straightforward and standard, but you don't know as things are evolving. And it really does bode why it's so critical to submit a very comprehensive submission at the forefront. Very succinct, very straightforward, following all the guidance and all of the requirements, because this will make your submission process more streamlined in this kind of little, rocky waters with the FDA right now.
Thank you, Jennifer. So you talked a little bit about days. So when a company asks for a pre-sub meeting, how long does it typically take to get a pre-sub meeting? What are the timeframes?
Yeah, it takes 70 days to get the feedback from FDA. And then within 5 days, you get the 1 hour, meeting with them subsequent. So 75 days for the entire pre-submission process.
Thank you. There is one question. Camilo wants to know, is there a group or agency that you suggest working with that has experience working with the FDA in terms of regulations behind cybersecurity when it comes to software that's part of a medical device?
Yeah, first of all, there's amazing cybersecurity guidance. It's quite in depth. So I definitely will just shout out that document for folks to read. And cybersecurity is going to be just like AI, just as AI changes, the cybersecurity component is also going to, change quite significantly. And so definitely you'd want to keep up with both at the same time, even as part of like post-market surveillance and the sorts of things you have to do when you have this kind of technology. We work with RQM Plus, so I'd recommend them. They're the agency we've worked with from the very beginning, that have been pretty good about making sure that we are aware of the latest requirements for cybersecurity. So definitely look them up. There are quite a few very competent regulatory agencies that know how to handle this now. I think that's become a important measure. And so I would say that, with the guidance that exists and stuff like that, I think most of the regular agencies that you come up with will be able to handle some of those requirements. There are niche questions that you may have depending on your technology as well. And I would urge, if, as a founder, you also please try to get second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth opinions on a lot of these things as well outside of your regulatory team. So look for cybersecurity experts and KOLs that you can connect with. The best things to do a lot of the time is to look at other existing companies or other existing, service providers that have cybersecurity offerings to see what they're doing to be compliant as well. That can be a very useful way for you to get information quickly about what the general industry practices are outside of course, putting a Q sub in, for example.
Jennifer, do you have expertise in this area?
I would just recommend to find an appropriate testing facility as well to test the cybersecurity. Everything that Vivek already had said, but the testing piece is also critical. So finding an agency or an organization that has successfully navigated testing for cybersecurity for submission purposes.
Correct.
Thank you.
That's a big piece. Yep.
We have one more question. Susan wants to know about reimbursement. How do you reconcile speeding up FDA process with 510(k) versus potentially getting your own code payment through de novo?
Yeah, I can take that one. That's what I'm currently working on at Neurava as well, right? Commercialization, reimbursement, coding, coverage, payment, all fun stuff. Regulatory is step one of probably a 10-step process to get your technology to market, right? So it's just honestly, the race starts once you get medically cleared or the agency clears you. They're speeding up the 510(k). I'm not that, if you're available, as soon as you're able to submit when you feel comfortable, but the process is the process. And so there really isn't much you can do to speed up the review process necessarily. From a coding and coverage standpoint, it depends on, what is the existing landscape that you're looking at, whether you want to crosswalk or whether you're going to gap fill. Are there existing codes that you can fall under, or you really are going to have to develop a new code or coverage or a new code? I think your biggest indicator there, though, outside of the regulatory side, is obviously all the real world evidence that you likely have to collect. One of the things that I would say that you can do as your regulatory process is going on is looking at claims analysis. So conducting, your healthcare economics, budget impact, cost utility, making sure that you're using existing literature to be able to understand at the end of the day, how much money can you save to the healthcare system and why. So there's actually quite a lot that you can do with existing literature, and if you have access to claims databases, in order to understand what that payment profile and coverage profile would look like, in addition to then looking for existing codes that are out there. But it is definitely, once you get cleared is really when you can start having those real discussions about your technology with your payers, and then also then considering doing any real world evidence trials that you might have to do. Unfortunately, there's no way to speed it up.
I hear that there is more of a collaboration now between the FDA and the CMS in helping speed up this process. Has that been your experience?
Yes. The previously it used to be that, if you could get breakthrough device designation, that facilitated expedited review with CMS. That unfortunately is not the case anymore. That doesn't happen at all, really. The agency is trying to bring that program back up. And through breakthrough device, nowadays you can get at least a meeting with a payer if you're lucky. They tried to set it up. It doesn't always happen. So just be mindful of that. Breakthrough device, I would say, is more of a marketing piece, really, where you get to say that the FDA thinks your device is, novel and, breakthrough, really. What it does help you is in terms of having expedited conversations with the agency about getting your device cleared. So that does help. And so from that perspective, to speed up your path to market, if it is and it more so applies, remember that breakthrough means it's de novo. So that's also what you have to keep in mind.
Right. Well, thank you both so much for your time. This has been an excellent conversation.